Hello and welcome to, oops, got my glasses on, Fedora Fiction Press video of Menace in the Goldilocks Zone. We are up to the final chapter. Menace in the Goldilocks Zone, the final chapter. Yes, we're at the last chapter. As you recall, last time Roger and Peregrine were discussing the fact that the Xenosian raiders didn't have any crews, and Peregrine seemed to be putting some things together that upset her very much. So here we are. We will read the last couple chapters of chapter 23 and then go into chapter 24, The Legacy. She, Peregrine, changes screens on her tablet and consults a chart. The last alignment in Kryptos and Xenos was "No! No!" Roger's goggles indicate a loud shrieking. Peregrine slams her tablet down and begins picking up random objects in the room and throwing them against the cabin wall, all the while shrieking in a language that goggles report as "not in the database." Roger gathers up the artifacts before Peregrine can smash them to bits. She throws herself on the bed, still shrieking, clutching at her hair and pulling it out in clumps. She kicks and writhes, shrieking all the while. Roger rushes to the communication panel. "Forge them! Broadtrunk! Anyone! Come to Peregrine's cabin quickly! She's having some kind of seizure!" Chapter 24. The Legacy. Peregrine only calms down when Forgedem threatens to summon the Iredian medicos. She refuses to speak, however, remaining curled in a ball on her bed, her back to the room, making low moaning sounds. Forgedem, Roger, and Broadtrunk withdraw from her cabin to confer outside, keeping the door open in case she became violent again. "You have no idea what set her off?" Forgedem asked Roger for the third time. "No, as I told you, we were discussing the crewless Xenosian raiders Gape told me about," Roger replies. "She became agitated and muttered something about the last time Xenos and Kryptos aligned. Then, well, you saw how she was." "Has she before done this?" Broadtrunk asks. "Not that I've ever seen," Forgedem says. "I did notice she was uncharacteristically tense and anxious on Kryptos." "Well," Roger observes wryly, "turns out she had a reason, didn't she?" "Yes," Forgedem admits, "she certainly did." "How was she on the freighter? While you were using her weapon, I mean." "All business," Forgedem looks to Broadtrunk for confirmation. "Yes," Broadtrunk agrees. "Very much. Focus." "Well," Roger says after a brief pause in the conversation, "I'll stay with her so you two can get your rest. I'll let you know if anything changes." "I'll relieve you at next watch," Forgedem promises. She and Broadtrunk turn to leave when Roger stops them with a question. "Captain, when was the last time Kryptos and Xenos were in alignment?" "All the middle planets come into a rough alignment about every 75 years, she replies. "That's why we had to make this journey now. Otherwise, it would have taken many times as long." "Did anything happen 75 years ago? Anything to do with Xenos or Kryptos?" Forgedem and Broadtrunk exchange baffled looks. "That was a long time before either of us was born," Forgedem notes, "but I'm not aware of anything." "I not know of something," Broadtrunk echoes. "Oh, neither do I, but something must have," Roger notes. "Go to your rest," he adds, moving into Peregrine's cabin. "I'll see you at change of watch." He re-enters the cabin and looks at Peregrine, who is still curled up on the bed, but is no longer making any sound. Roger sits at the table and stares vacantly at the 4 artifacts there. He pulls existence to him for closer examination, and is startled to see that the only comprehensible part of the composition is the word existence. The rest of the composition is gibberish. The color elements are bordered with gold inlay, a very non-cerulean design feature. He examines the Mare Urban Compass. Like the cerulean artifact, its design elements are outlined in gold inlay. but his goggles tell him the cardinal points on the compass are out of sequence. North and south are 90 degrees from one another, as are east and west. Similarly, the artifact of the Aredian symbols, which Roger's goggles now inform him are the names for the hours of daylight, has the same gold inlay, but also the same jumbled composition. The hour of sunset is immediately followed by the hour of high noon. Finally, the Arborian skycatcher's gold inlay makes the diffusion of light impossible. The artifacts, Roger realizes, aren't artifacts at all, but copies. Bad ones. He is pushing the artifacts away in frustration when he notices that the ends of some of the gold inlay along one edge of the existence artifact align perfectly with those on an edge of the skycatcher. He puts these two together and tries to align the inlay on the Aredian sundial and finds an edge that aligns with the skycatcher. He has to rotate the Mare Urban compass twice, but two of its edges now align with the inlay on the sundial and those on existence. He looks at the entire composition and realizes that a pattern is created, not by the color elements in the pieces, but by the gold inlay that outlines them. Though there is clearly a structure and consistency to the pattern, it is abstract, and Roger cannot determine its meaning. He turns his attention to Peregrine and sees that her breathing has become deep and regular. He is relieved that she is sleeping at last. He decides to settle in on the floor for some sleep himself. He awakes some time later to see Peregrine still lying on her bed, looking at him. "Why are you still here?" she asks him, without moving. "I didn't think you should be left alone." She makes one of those eloquent expressions with her face, one in which she moves her mouth as if amused, but her eyes remain sad. "But I am nonetheless," she says cryptically. Roger chooses to ignore the comment for now, instead asking, "How do you feel?" "Like a failure and a fool," she says despondently. "Why? I don't understand," Roger says, feeling genuine distress for her. "You've accomplished what you set out to do. You've recovered the artifacts and destroyed the evil machine. And as if that weren't enough, you helped save the Aredian base." Peregrine rolls over onto her back and looks up at the ceiling. "Have I? Well, it's too little too late." She looks back at Roger. "I'm sorry, my friend. This whole journey was for nothing. I've wasted your time." "How? I still don't understand." Her gaze returns to the ceiling, and she draws a very deep breath. "We didn't destroy the intelligent machine," she says finally. "We destroyed an intelligent machine." "You mean there's more?" "I'm afraid so." "Where? How do you know?" She draws another deep breath, rolls over to sit up. "I can't say that I know for certain," she admits despondently, "but there are just too many coincidences to draw any other conclusion." "You seem determined to befuddle me with cryptic pronouncements," Roger declares, exasperated. "Why can't you just tell me what's wrong?" "Where do I begin?" she asks, looking at the floor. "How about explaining how you wasted my time?" Peregrine nods her head and looks at him. "The whole reason we came out here was to retrieve these artifacts so the intelligent machine couldn't use the knowledge they contain to spread." "I see," Roger says. "But it has spread," Peregrine says. "The catastrophe we sought to avert has already happened. It happened 75 years or so ago." "So it has already used the knowledge?" "No, I don't think so. It was spread by other means." "What means?" Peregrine pushed her fingers through her tangled hair and looked back at the floor. "I might as well tell you," she says grimly. "It can't matter anymore." She sits up and looks at Roger. "It was spread by my ancestors," she says abruptly. "In fact, this whole situation was created by my ancestors." "Wait," Roger says. "Your ancestors made this evil machine? Why? Why would Nebulans make an evil machine out on Kryptos of all places?" "Well, they didn't think it was evil when they made it," Peregrine responds, slumping down again. "And they weren't Nebulans. I'm not really Nebulan." Didn't you tell me that my home is on Nebula? Yes, I did tell you that, and it's true. I was born and raised on Nebula. But you're not Nebulan. Not in the way you are Cerulean, or that Forged Am is my Urban, Peregrine says as if confessing a crime. My people did not evolve on Nebula, or any other planet in the solar system. It was lucky for Roger that Peregrine said nothing further, because he had to look at the translation on his goggles twice to be sure he had seen it correctly. Not Nebulan? Was all he could say at this. No, Peregrine tells him patiently. My people come from across the galaxy, or so my grandparents told me. Grandparents, Roger repeats vacantly. Recent ancestors, Peregrine says by way of explanation. So your grandparents made this evil machine? No. Again, Peregrine speaks patiently. It was their ancestors, very distant ancestors, that made the machine. Distant ancestors. How long have your people been in the solar system? When did they get here? I don't know exactly, Peregrine admits, but a long time ago. A very long time ago. Hundreds of years? Thousands? Peregrine draws another deep breath. My grandparents told me that the first of our people came here hundreds of thousands of years ago. Perhaps even 1,000,000. Roger is now certain that he's in the middle of some bizarre dream and wishes he would wake up. 1,000,000? Yes. They came here looking for planets to colonize. Again, Roger is perplexed. Colonize? Yes. Their home planet was becoming uninhabitable. Too many people and too few resources, Peregrine explains. They came here looking for another place to live. So they colonized Nebula. No, Peregrine shakes her head. Not at first. Conditions weren't suitable for any life when they first got here, on Nebula or any other planet. But Nebula and several of the other planets were similar enough to their home planet that they thought they could modify their environments to become like the home planet. How? Wouldn't that take a lot of time? And energy? Time especially, Peregrine agrees. As to how, she sighs. From what I understand, they seeded the planets with organisms they expected to create a favorable environment. So they seeded Nebula. Nebula and 6 others. Oh, what happened? Did it work? Oh, it worked very well. All 7 planets became very much like the home planet. At least 4 had intelligent, technologically advanced species evolve. What do you mean at least 4? Well, I don't know how technologically advanced the Xenosians were. Were? There you go being cryptic again, Roger says, his exasperation renewed. I just told you last night that the Xenosians were using automated weapons platforms, and you say you don't know how advanced they were? You seem to be missing the broader implications, Peregrine observes dryly. But to address your confusion, those raiders were not any more Xenosian than I am Nebulan. I suspect they never were. I'm sorry, Roger says, feeling a headache coming on, but that did nothing to address my confusion. I strongly suspect, in fact I am almost certain, that the malignant machine intelligence spread to Xenos about 75 years ago when my great-grandparents arrived. Wait, didn't you say that your people arrived hundreds of thousands, even 1,000,000 years ago? The first of my people, yes. There were several groups that arrived over time. The most recent being my recent ancestors. They were the last. And they spread the malignancy to Xenos? I suspect so, yes. Why? Well, they didn't intend to, Peregrine replies defensively. In fact, they came to destroy it. They failed. She pushes her hand through her hair again. Look, she says finally, all I know about this is from stories my grandparents told me, that were told to them by their parents. I don't know how much of them are true, but it's all I've got to go on. Perhaps you'd better begin at the beginning then, Roger suggests. Those first of your people, you say they came from across the galaxy from their home planet. How did they get here? The galaxy is hundreds of thousands of light years across. That's a good question, Peregrine nods. I'm a little hazy on that, but it seems they discovered a way to travel across the galaxy at the speed of light. That's impossible, Roger declares. I don't remember much of my basic physics, but I do remember that the energy required to accelerate anything larger than an electron to light speed is astronomical, infinite. Well, that's what I remember as well, Peregrine assures him. But it seems they discovered a kind of secret passage, a shortcut across space that didn't require that much energy. But even light takes hundreds of thousands of years to travel such a distance, Roger points out, and you told me your people only live 100 years. Well, that's the thing about the secret passage, Peregrine explains. The trip seems almost instantaneous. 1 second they're near their homeworld, the next they're here, in space near Kryptos. How can this be? How did my grandmother explain it? Peregrine asks herself. Space and time are like this blanket, she says after some thought, smoothing out the bedclothes next to her. We think of it as being smooth and flat, like this. If this blanket were the galaxy, my people's homeworld would be here, she points to a spot away from her, and Kryptos would be here, right next to me. But in reality, space and time are all wadded up, like this, she demonstrates by pulling the blanket into a ball, making Kryptos and the homeworld closer, but only if you can travel through the folds. And this secret passage is a way through the folds. Yes. So these ancestors made their way through the folds in the galaxy to Kryptos and this solar system and seeded some of the planets with organisms to make them more like the home planet. What was it called? What was what called? The home planet. What was their name for it? Well, Peregrine says thoughtfully, the name would translate as dirt or soil or even ground, like the ground under your feet. None of those are very good names, Roger says critically, but I guess ground is the best of them. So they do things to make the planets around here more like ground. Then what? Then they set up this automated system, a group of thinking machines to monitor the process and make sure things go as planned. And this is where things start to go wrong. They decide to go back to ground to organize transports to bring people here while the machines keep an eye on things. They thought they'd be gone only a few years, but what they didn't realize is that the secret passage has a price. A price? What price? What they saved in energy, they paid in time. In time? I thought you said the trip seemed instantaneous. It did, to them. What they found out after they went back to ground was that even though it was instantaneous to them, many hundreds of thousands of years had passed back on ground, which means that many hundreds of thousands of years had passed here too. Wait, I'm confused again, Roger says in frustration. The trip for them was very quick, but for everyone else, it took hundreds of millennia. I don't really understand it myself, Peregrine admits. It's what my grandmother told me. She said that the faster you go, the slower time passes for you, but it passes relatively faster for everyone else not with you. So time passed more slowly for those ancestors traveling in the secret passage, Roger observes. Apparently, yes. Bizarre, Roger notes. So what happened next? Well, these people get back to ground and find things are very different from when they left. People had figured out how to live in balance with the planet, but only after many catastrophes that greatly reduced the population. It took these ancestors a while, but they eventually got people to understand where they had been and what they had done. But once they had, they were imprisoned as criminals. What? Why? Because they had interfered with the development of life on other planets. They had deliberately contaminated whole worlds for their own benefit. They were only trying to help their people, Roger exclaims. They shouldn't be imprisoned for that. But they did so at the expense of other people who had not yet even evolved yet. And now wouldn't at all because of their interference, Peregrine explains sadly. It's as if they slaughtered whole peoples before they had a chance to exist. But how could they know? Roger protests. There's no way they could know what would evolve and what wouldn't. That's precisely what makes what they did wrong, Peregrine replies patiently. They couldn't know what the long-term effects of their actions would be, who else they could be affecting, so they shouldn't have interfered with other worlds. None of us know what the long-term effects of our actions will be, Roger counters. None of us could do anything if we had to let that stop us. Well, it seems there were people on ground who had the same point of view, Peregrine continues, dropping the argument. They obtained the information about the secret passage and organized a group of similarly dissatisfied people to go and colonize the planets the criminals had discovered. They left in several vessels and arrived on Kryptos. You think it was that group that made the dam we found? Quite likely. Why? There were quite a few bodies in the cave. Roger looks at Peregrine with trepidation. Bodies of people who looked like you. Peregrine nods. Well then, you can probably guess what happened next. Yes, but I don't understand why. You have to remember that it had been hundreds of thousands of even a million years since the original criminals had first visited. Things were very different. Life had evolved, but so had the original thinking machine that had been left to look after things. It seems that it interpreted its mission to make pristine natural environments on these planets to mean that it had to keep them that way, to snuff out any technologically advanced life. And it did that by turning the colonist technology against them. Infecting it, Roger notes. Yes, but a handful of these colonists were able to escape and hide on Nebula. Your great-grandparents? No. My great-grandparents were among a group of heavily armed people sent after the colonists to stop them and take them away from here. They felt strongly that interfering in the development of other worlds was very wrong, and though the damage by the original criminals was done, they wanted to stop any further contamination by retrieving the colonists. They found Nebula first and learned what had happened on Kryptos. According to my grandmother, they realized that their mission was more involved than simply taking people away, that they had to destroy the machines as well. So they went to Kryptos. Yes, but not before hiding the knowledge of the secret passage. The people who had escaped had luckily kept the information about the secret passage from getting captured by the machine. The people with my great-grandparents realized that the machine would spread throughout the galaxy if it learned of that passage, of that technology. So they hid it in artifacts and left them on different planets as a precaution. So this isn't the original existence. No, Peregrine replies with an amused expression. Of course not. You knew that once you looked at it. Yes, I did. So the original is still missing. Yes, Peregrine looks at Roger with an anguished expression. I'm sorry I lied to you, she says, but I couldn't retrieve these alone. I needed help. Why couldn't you just tell me the truth then, and why are you telling me now? I couldn't tell you then because that would be continuing the contamination. Knowing that your species came to be as a result of interference might have a negative effect on the course of your civilization, on all the civilizations. I'm telling you now because it doesn't matter. The evil is already spread. The more you tell me, the more questions I have, Roger notes wryly. But foremost among them is what makes you so sure that it is spread. Peregrine runs her hands through her hair again. 75 years ago, my great-grandparents and the others that came here with them traveled to Kryptos to confront the machine. A terrible battle ensued above what they thought was Kryptos. Most of my great-grandparents' companions were killed, and many of the infected space vessels brought by the colonists crashed on the surface of the planet and were thought to be destroyed. My great-grandparents' vessel, the Exile, was the only vessel to survive the battle, but it was badly damaged. They managed to get back to Nebula, but 75 years ago, Kryptos and Xenos were in alignment. So you think the battle was above Xenos and not Kryptos? I'm almost certain. How else would you explain the rapid technological advancement on that planet? Well, it could be that the Xenosians are a very clever, if violent, people, Roger suggests. But from what I've seen and what you've told me, I think we have reason to be concerned. You have a gift for understatement, my friend. Well, it's certainly not understating the case to say that we need to tell your story to the Iredians and everyone else. I am not as discouraged as you are, Roger adds. I believe we can overcome this machine by working together, and by making more of that weapon of yours. But that's just creating more contamination, Peregrine protests, holding her head in her hands. That fruit is already set, my friend. We have to deal with the situation as it is, not as we wish it were. How can we make good decisions about our present circumstances without all the information available? For you to withhold that information is just as arrogant as it was for those criminals to decide the course of evolution on our planets. If you want to make things right, you need to share everything you know. Peregrine sits up and nods in agreement, or at least understanding. So, what do you know about these? Roger indicates the artifacts. Peregrine only glances at the table. I told you, I can't figure out how the circuit works. Perhaps it's not a circuit, Roger suggests. Look at them again. Do you see what I see? Peregrine gets up from the bed to stand over the table. What do you see? Look at the gold inlay. Peregrine stares a moment. Then her eyes widen. It's a pattern code, she says excitedly. They hid the information in a pattern code. Do you know how to read it? No, but there's a device on the Exile that can. Good. Now you and your people can go back to your home world. Peregrine gives Roger one of those eloquent expressions of rueful sadness. There is no home world to go back to, she says, and no more people to go back. I'm the last of my kind. What? How can that be? My grandmother told me that at the time my great-grandparents left ground, their sun was getting larger. It was dying. My great-grandparents knew that by the time they arrived here, that sun would have engulfed ground and all the other planets in the system. Theirs was a one-way mission to salvage the legacy of my people. But I thought they came to take the colonists away. Yes, away from here, not back to ground. They were to go into exile in space. Ah, thus the name. Yes. Many of the people left on Nebula lost hope. They didn't want to raise children only to have them slaughtered by the machine as their friends were. Only my family stubbornly clung to the belief that we could still make things right, so that the legacy of my people would not be death and destruction. The door to the room opened and Forrest M appeared. It's a change of... Oh, how are you feeling? She asked Peregrine. More hopeful, Peregrine assures her. I'm sorry for my tantrum. I hope I did not distress you too much. Well, I'm relieved to see you over it, Forrest M replies. Perhaps you can tell me what it was about sometime. I will, I promise. That reminds me, Captain, Roger interjects. Could you please get a message to Admiral Gape? Tell her there's someone I really would like her to meet. Well, that's it. That's the end of Menace in the Goldilocks Zone. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed reading it. I enjoyed writing it. Feel free to make any comments or leave any comments on the Facebook page, the Fedora Fiction Press Facebook page. I also have a blog. It's called nascentfiction.wordpress.com. And as I've said before, all these videos of me reading the book are on YouTube on the Thomas C. Goss, Goss, channel. You can also search Menace in the Goldilocks Zone, and they should turn up there. So, it's been fun. I've enjoyed it. Hope you have too. Goodbye.